And then we can talk about soil, which is really important. And that's a big part of this section, and it's a big part of the test. So soil is basically this solid material. I used to call it dirt, right? But apparently, like soil folks get really upset when you call soil dirt, because soil is way more important than dirt. Dirt would be like the non-living part of the soil, like the particles, where soil itself actually has some biological stuff in it. So like we can talk about the humus layer, which is like decomposed leaves and animals, that kind of stuff. So there's bacteria and stuff like that. So soil actually has a living component to it as well. And that's different from dirt. And that's why the soil folks get kind of all upset when you call soil dirt. So soil is basically helps us recycle those nutrients, right? So we've got a lot of carbon and other elements trapped up in living things. And then when those things fall to the soil, they start decomposing, and that carbon gets released, and those elements that are in those living things get released back to the soil, and then it can go some sort of decomposer, or something will usually eat that stuff, and then something will eat them, and then that gets that carbon back in the food web. Okay, so that's, otherwise it would get stuck in living things, and when the living things died, if they didn't decompose, that carbon would get stuck there, and we would, I don't know if we would run out of carbon, but it would stop that carbon cycle, right? So we can talk about, there's a lot of characteristics of soil. I know you guys have been talking about them in your FRQ. So the soil, we can talk about the parent material, and that's usually caused by the geology of the area. So for example, in Florida, the soil is limestone based because, Florida is basically limestone. And so it depends on where your actual area is, and what the base rock is there. That's usually what the parent material of your soil is. And then weathering will basically break down that rock into soil. And so that's kind of how that works. So we'll talk in a second about the different sizes of the particles. Well, like I'll tell you the different layers. So this is what I was talking about in the at the very beginning, when I said that the sand is going to filter out first. Because you think about sand, and sand particles actually aren't that large, right? But they're actually the biggest soil particles. So they're going to filter out first. They are the biggest. So soil that has a lot of sand is going to drain really well. And it's going to have a large pore space. You can kind of think about if you had a box of M&Ms or a box of tennis balls. The tennis balls are going to have a lot more space in between them than the M&Ms because they're just bigger. Okay, or if you had a box of basketballs versus tennis balls, right? The bigger particle is going to have bigger spaces in between. Okay. Then you've got silt. That's like your mid-size particle. Okay, so it's going to have medium pore space, medium drainage ability, that kind of thing. And then your last one is clay, and that's this little piece right here, and that's the smallest. So you're going to have the least pore space, and it's going to drain really poorly. And in North Georgia, we have a lot of clay, and so that red stuff. And so you may see that, like, that clay, it doesn't drain. Like in our backyard, we have an area that is mostly clay because the dogs have, running all over it all the time, biological weathering, and basically trampled all the plants. And so it's just clay. And when it rains, it just kind of sits there. And then the dogs get all gross because it doesn't drain very well, because there's not a lot of pore space in clay, and it just doesn't drain well. So then that lab I was telling you about, that's why the sand is going to filter out first. then the silt, and that's why the clay takes so long to filter out. And sometimes all of it won't even filter out after 24 hours. But if you know the sand and the silt, then you can use math to figure out how much clay you had. So these are basically the main particle sizes. Then we can talk about this soil texture triangle, and it basically will tell you the relative proportions of each one in the soil. So we could go, so this is common, this roughly 40% sand, silt, and clay. So let's try and put this in the in here. So I like to do clay first. Um, so if I have 20% clay, I'm going to go along here somehow. And then if I have 40% silt, I'm going to go down this way. And then if I have, let's see, 20% or 40% sand, I'm going to go this way. And these will all meet right here. Right, and that's loam. So basically, wherever they meet, that's the type of soil that you have, and which makes sense that it says considered loam. Um, so basically, that's the best soil is having loamy soil, and you can see there's loam here, here, and people like having loam because it's a little bit of each, right? It's not going to drain super fast like sand, or the plants may not have time to take up the water because it drains so fast, and it's not going to be like clay where it's going to just almost like suffocate the plants. This plants can actually have something called like root rot, where they can basically drown if the soil doesn't um, drain very well. So then this is kind of what I was talking about earlier. The larger particles are going to have larger spaces, and the smaller particles, they'll actually have more surface area relative to their volume. And so nutrients and water molecules and things like that cling to surfaces. So the smaller the particle, the smaller or the more surface area you're going to have. So the more likely the nutrient ions and the water and stuff is going to cling to that surface. So that's why you want a little bit of both. You don't want like just silt. And then we can talk about the workability. That's the ease with which a soil can be cultivated. A lot of times people don't like clay soil because, if it rains just a little bit, I got a text from someone today that was like, it's been raining and our soil is gross. Like the clay is gross. What do you want me to do with this? How am I supposed to do my lab? Right? Because just a little bit of moisture can make it like too muddy, or it can make it like super hard with a brick, right? There's a reason they make bricks out of clay. Okay. And then sandy soils are easy to work with, but if you've ever been to the beach, um, you might not want to build a house out of sand, right? Because, it's not going to get brick like a clay. So, they all have their benefits. So, like I said, the best soil texture is kind of something in the middle, because you're going to get a little bit of um, a little bit of everything. Excuse me. And then basically they're saying that that's rated medium as far as quality, but then when you add the organic parts into the soil, then you've got this really great soil. So this is what I was getting at, the soil profile. So you can see that these vertical layers are known as horizons. It's kind of like a cake. Um, and then a vertical slice is called a soil profile. And you can see, the farther down you are, the bigger the particles. Right in here, and in the top you can even see the particles, and that's because we basically got that parent material, and that parent material is getting smaller and smaller and smaller as we go up, and it's also mixing more and more with that decomposing matter, that organic matter, right? And then this O horizon, this humus, the topsoil, these two parts are really the most important parts of the soil. In a lot of places, like when they sell like topsoil, they actually take, right, they like slice this part off and they put it in the bags and they sell it to people and they take it from that part of the land, right? Well, that's the best part of the soil. So then wherever they took that from now doesn't have that great soil. Um, a lot of times when they build neighborhoods, they'll clear it all to make it flat, and they'll take away that topsoil and humus part, and then they'll just put like a really, really thin layer back when just enough so the grass will grow. So then a lot of times, like um, at our old house, we were adding plants and we would dig just past the surface and it would just be like this clay. And we'd have to dig these big holes, put topsoil in it, put nice soil and fertilizer and stuff like that. Not fertilizer, like compost. And then we put our plants in there because it was, the soil was such bad quality there, or there wasn't any topsoil, because whoever made the neighborhood, they scraped it all away. And then usually that's where then they'll sell it or whatever to someone. And so that O horizon is the most important part. It's where you're getting that humus. Kind of if you go into your yard maybe or into a forest and you scrape away those leaves and things like that, and then you get that dark soil. That's that humus, that good stuff. Um, a lot of times we'll add that to our garden because it's so rich in organic material. The A horizon is basically a little bit of humus and a little bit of the like dirt part of the soil, and so that's where you're getting that topsoil. The E horizon is basically where we're going to have some leaching. You're not going to have a lot of humus, and then basically minerals that are resistant to leaching, they're going to stick there. The B horizon is anything that came from that A and E horizon. A lot of times it's going to be high in iron, and it's often high in clay. And then that C horizon is basically that parent material, whatever you had before that, and that's kind of like rocks and stuff. So if we want to classify the soils, we can soils can actually be classified like soil folks. That's their job. That's not what they like. They actually classify soils just like they classify plants and animals. And then the order is the most inclusive, and the class is the most specific. And then there's literally like hundreds of classes of soils. We are not going to get nearly that detailed. We're just going to talk about some of the most important ones and their characteristics and where they're located, because that's important. And you'll see that on the AP exam, where they'll say like, what's the soil in this environment like? They won't necessarily say like, oh, is this an arid soil? But they'll ask you about the soil in that environment. So mollusk soils are found in temperate grasslands. So I've circled on the map kind of where those are mostly found, and they are the best soils for agriculture. Okay, and notice it's a temperate grassland, not a forest, not a rainforest, a grassland. Okay, so when people are cutting down rainforests to grow crops, they're not even cutting, it's not even like the best soil for growing stuff. So that's why it's not so useful. And then after a couple of years, they've got to then cut down some more forests because the soil isn't meant for growing stuff like that anyway. But the grasslands have this really great, the grasses are always dying, and so they're always decomposing. So you've got this really great humus layer, which makes it really great for growing things because there's all that nutrients, and then there's not a ton of rain, and so the minerals and all the good stuff doesn't get leached downward, where it's too deep for the plants to actually get to. So that's why you'll notice that most of our croplands in the United States are in that middle of the United States, which is also like the Great Plains. Okay, that's not a coincidence. Then you can have the oxysoils. These are our tropical rainforests, and that's what's in red. Okay, I've highlighted them. They have a layer of iron and aluminum on the B horizon, and their O horizon is very, very small due to the rapid decomposition of plant matter because it is so wet there and everything. And so you've got this little O horizon, and the way that it supports such life in a rainforest is because the rainforest is so vibrant that you've got all these things that are always dying. Leaves are always falling, things are always dying. And so you've got that little O horizon that turns over very quickly, but it's always there. And so there's always that nutrient level for them. Now, if you were to cut all that down, right? Cut all those forests down. You're not getting all those leaves all the time. And so that little overrising can very quickly get basically all the good stuff can get used up in it. And then, and then you can't grow plants anymore because it doesn't have that really great deep O horizon. And then again, it rains a lot. And so you're going to have all those, a lot of the nutrients are going to, get leached away. So that's why a lot of times, cutting down the rainforest to grow crops is not the best idea, besides the fact that it's not a good idea to cut down rainforest to begin with. Then we can have alpha soils. These are like moist temperate forest biomes. You can see those here. These are those light green that I've circled. They have well developed, but they're not very deep for the different horizons. This would be, I would say, probably like the second best place to grow things, but it's not, the grasslands are really the best. Then we can talk about arid soils, and these are the ones that I remember the best because arid is like an environment with not a lot of rain. And so these are basically places that are really dry or deserts. And you can see there's orange and there's a lot of them. They're not very vertically, they're not structured well. They're thin, they're light colored. If you irrigate in these places, you're usually going to get a lot of salinization, that thing that we've been talking about this unit and will continue to talk about. And that's because when you irrigate at these places, it's so dry that and so hot usually that the water evaporates very, very quickly, and that causes the salt to just be drawn to the surface or just really as soon as that water evaporates, it doesn't have a time to kind of like seep down. It just evaporates before it can seep down, and then you've got all that salt. So that's where you're going to have the worst salinization. Then we can talk about the nutrients in the soil. And again, this is a lot about that FRQ that you guys were doing. The pH and the salinity are pretty crucial to the soil. And then they'll talk about the fertility of the soil, which is the ability to support plant growth. Okay. And so that's talking about the proper amount of nutrients in that soil. So a soil with a high soil fertility will be really great at growing plants, and a low soil fertility would be not very great at growing plants. Again, when we talk about leaching, a lot of y'all are talking about when the soil has salinized, or there's been salinization of the soil, leaching, and basically that's when you can just flood the soil with water, and that gets the nutrients to kind of run away. And then we can talk about the nutrient holding capacity. That's one of the things that y'all have been using on your FRQ as a property of the soil. And then the three most important things in the soil are the ability to allow water to soak in. Okay, you want it to soak in, but you don't want it to soak in so fast like sand, where it just soaks all the way down and then the plants don't get a chance to get it. The ability to hold water after it infiltrates, that's that water holding capacity. That's why we do like a little bit of clay in our soil, right? Because it's going to hold on to water. And the ability to minimize evaporative water loss, okay? Because the less evaporation, the less likely you're going to have salinization of your soil. So the pH neutral is really the best, but different plants are adapted to different pH ranges. In fact, hibiscus, no, not hibiscus, hydrangea. Whether you've got a pink hydrangea or a blue hydrangea depends on the acidity of the soil. So if you're a plant person, I don't remember which one's which, but if you see like a blue hydrangea, you know that soil is really basic. Or if you see a pink hydrangea, you know that soil is really acidic. I could have it backwards. Again, I'm not a hydrangeologist, if that's even a thing. So then how do we get good plant growth? We must have a good supply of nutrients and nutrient holding capacity. We must allow infiltration. We must allow the water to hold the water a little bit and resist evaporative water loss, but we don't want to have too much water holding capacity like all clay, where then, we could get root rot or our plants could drown. We want it to be porous. We want good aeration, right? Good pore space, um, near a neutral pH and not a ton of salt. So now we can talk about the organic matter that lives in the soil. Um, there's this huge food web of critters that live in the soil that we don't even think about because they're so tiny. And they're really important for aerating the soil. Like earthworms can move like so much soil through their bodies, right? And that aerates the soil and kind of mixes it up. Um, when these little critters die, again, we're going to have, that's going to release carbon into the soil, organic matter, which we need. And so all of these guys are really important because they help with that soil community. So even though it's kind of gross, I don't like playing in the dirt soil because of all these gross guys, but they're important. So here's some more of the humus. You can see it's that really dark part. You're going to have it at the bottom of the overhorizon. It's going to hold a lot of water and nutrients. And then a lot of people create their own humus by composting. So you can take a bunch of organic waste and leaves and things like that, and you can put it in a compost bin, and you basically are creating your own. That's what you're doing with that. This is your topsoil. It's clumpy, it's loose, it's got a lot of humus, it's really good for supporting plant growth. And then if we lost all of our topsoil due to erosion or whatever we lost, we would lose like 85 to 90% in productivity. So an area that loses all of its topsoil due to erosion or something like that, they're gonna have a very steep decline in productivity, which is like how much plants they can grow in that area. So if that's an agricultural field, you're gonna have huge problems, right? Because you're not gonna be able to grow your plants very well. So how do we protect the soil? The best way to protect the soil is to grow plants there. And what plants do is the roots kind of hold the soil together and they protect the soil from erosion. You'll notice that if you have places where there's not a lot of plants, you're going to have a lot more erosion than if you have a ton of plants. Because the plants, they do that. They hold that soil together. And so that's one of the problems they talk about with like farmers when they let their land lay fallow. It's nice because they're they're not growing something there, but if they don't plant something over it, a lot of times that really good topsoil can then just erode away. So our humus will decompose at a rate of 2 to 5% per year, which is why we need to constantly renew it, right? And the way we renew it is getting more of those organic things decomposing. So in a grassland, it would be the grass. So soil degradation. This is kind of, now we're getting into what you might discuss in your soil threat summary or the threats to soil quiz. How can our soil be degraded? What is it called? Consider when it's degraded. It's basically when the soil is not the way it should be, right? Something has happened where it's not basically at full strength, or it's not as good as it could be. Erosion is a huge way we have soil degradation. That's one of the most common ways. So you'll see erosion as an answer on an AP exam a lot because basically the soil and the humus are being picked up and carried away by water or wind. Runoff will cause a lot of erosion. If your soil filters quickly, you're not going to have a lot of runoff because that water is going to be able to filter through very quickly. And then those lighter particles, the clay and the humus, are the first to be carried away. That area in my yard I told you that was mostly clay that the dogs play in when it gets wet. Not only it's kind of a hilly area in our yard, and so it's just clay. And then when it rains, you can actually see down that little hill. It goes to like a patio, and you can see that the clay has actually run off onto the patio, and that patio down there is like it's covered in clay. Okay, so we've got and that's because clay runs off so well. So we've got this little patio like this, and then we've got this area like this, and then the clay is right here. So what happens is that clay, when it rains, the water just like kind of, it doesn't filter down, it just stays on top, and it takes this clay with it, and now we've got this clay like all over this patio because it's just run off onto that patio. And so we're seeing that in our, um, you know, we're not growing anything here, so it's not a huge issue to us besides being annoying that we've got clay all over our patio. But if this was a garden or an agricultural field where we were growing something, we would be losing all of that soil and we wouldn't have any of the good stuff left. Um, we can also have something called desertification, and this is really a huge problem because what happens is after the clay will blow away first or run off first, right? And then the silt will go next because the silt is the next heaviest, but the sand stays. The sand won't go away because it's too heavy. Okay, so then you get this thing called a desert pavement, and it's basically like stones and gravel. You can see this here. It will protect the underlying soil against further erosion, but it's not super useful, right? You can see in that picture, there's like hardly anything growing there because it's just not super great. And it caused something called desertification. And we've talked a lot about salinization, but you can actually fix salinization, right? We've talked about all the methods, and even in your FRQ, it talks about how to fix salinization. Desertification is a problem because once you have desertification, you cannot fix it. It's done, it's permanent, that's it, you're a desert now. Okay, and it happens mostly in arid or places that are really, really dry. It's super serious, and we already have 41% of our Earth's lands that are these dry lands, and then 20% of those, 10 to 20% are degraded. Okay, so they're like desertified, which means you can't use them, which is about 6 billion hectares, which is, could feed like 2 billion people. So it's huge. It's an important issue, and it's very, very serious because you can't really fix it. Then we have something called overcultivation, which is usually caused by fertilizer. Most of it is caused by inorganic fertilizers, which are, those fertilizers you can buy in a bag at Home Depot that have specific, they list on the side, specific concentrations of nutrients. Those are usually inorganic fertilizers, and they can leach into waterways because you can, pour them all over your yard, and then if it rains, it'll just leach it away. It'll just, run off. Organic fertilizer would be like cow manure, or we used to get stuff called mushroom compost. That would be an organic fertilizer, excuse me. And then overgrazing is another huge soil issue. About 65% of these dry lands or dry areas are rangelands where we let usually food animals graze. Okay, these places are often overgrazed, where there's too many animals on this land and it overgrazes it, and then they overgraze it and they can deplete the amount of grass, excuse me, on that soil. And about 20% of these rangelands are overstocked, which means they have too many animals on them. Which is why in one of the FRQs, I think a way to like reduce the amount of land needed for agriculture, they say, or is to stop eating meat, because meat takes, like cows and things, take a lot of land to graze, where if you were to grow like wheat in that area, you'd get a lot more calories per acre, which is why they suggest like eating more on the food chain. You're also going to use less water to grow plants than to grow animals. And so one of the things they say is one of the best ways to conserve water is not to turn off your water while you're brushing your teeth or washing your hands, but actually stop eating red meat. And you're actually going to use a lot less water if you stop eating red meat and take long showers than if you just took short showers and kept eating red meat. So then one of the problems with overgrazing is then the plants aren't growing, And if the plants aren't growing in these dry areas, then you've got that soil exposed. Remember, we talked about the best way to save the soil and keep it in place and protect it from erosion is to having plants there. Well, if the plants are gone because they've been overgrazed and there's no plants, then that top layer, that soil, can now be blown away by wind or water erode away with watering, and then you're going to get that desertification. And that desertification, remember, is that thing that is permanent. So it's like this like cycle, right? Um, One thing leads to another. And again, the most widespread cause of this desertification is the livestock grazing. Um, that food, those food animals. Um, Another problem is that a big issue that causes problems with soil is deforestation, and that's when you're converting a forest to a grassland. You're going to increase erosion and runoff. Basically, remember that humus layer is really thin where the forests are, and so it washes away very, very easily, and then there's no trees left to have it come back, no leaves falling and things like that to reestablish that humus layer. And so then you've lost the top layer of the soil, which is the good part for growing plants, and then you've got basically this useless dirt. So that's troublesome as well. Irrigation causes huge problems to soil, and the reason irrigation causes huge problems to soil is because of salinization is why irrigation is so bad. So you can see here, when we're talking about irrigating our fields, we're not talking about just like watering our yard, right? This is huge amounts of water. You see how they've got that standing water there, right? And then if you've got that standing water and then you've done that in an area that is very arid, right? Then this is going to evaporate very, very quickly, and any salts that were in that water are going to be left on the soil. Like even fresh water has some salt in it, right? And so if you even if you're using super fresh water, you're still going to have some soils get evaporate and leave there. So this is called flood irrigation. And then we have something called center pivot irrigation, which is what this is on the bottom. And that might be, you may have seen this before. It's like there's a central well and the sprinklers kind of go around like this, and the water comes out right here and waters the whole area. If you've ever flown on an airplane and you've seen those like crop circles kind of like this, what that is that those are irrigation circles. The reason it's so green in those areas is because that's where the water, that's where the land was irrigated. And then, so worldwide, we've got about 277 million hectares irrigated, which is about a 54% increase over the last 30 years. So, like California's been having that drought. Most of the water in California gets used by the agricultural folks. And they've actually, there's some limitations on water now for the general public in California, but a lot of the agricultural folks were grandfathered, and so they can keep using the amount of water they've always been using. And so they're actually using more water than everyone else, and they're some of the cause of that, drought. But then, whatever they're growing is stuff that other people want to eat. So, we could say, oh, let's tell them not to grow that water. Well, fine. Do you want to pay, $3 for an avocado? Because, that's what's going to happen. So then salinization, which we've talked about a lot. I feel like I'm always grading stuff about salinization, your labs and the FRQ and the discussion posting that you guys have like next week. Is basically we're having too much salt in the soil, which is causing reduced plant growth. And like I said, this is what they're saying. Even the freshest water will still have some dissolved salts in it. So you can't just say, oh, just use fresh water, because these people are using fresh water. It's not like they're irrigating their fields with ocean water, right? They're using fresh water, but it's still got salt in it. And when it evaporates very quickly, the salt doesn't have a chance to kind of soak down and get used, and it just builds up in the soil. The good thing about salinization, as opposed to desertification, is you can avoid it and even reverse it. And that's one of the things that in your FRQ, the plate tectonics FRQ that you guys are asked to do is give a way or a method to reverse salinization or to remediate the soil. And then, so how do we do sustainable agriculture, right? We need to keep our topsoil. We need to keep our food safe and wholesome. That's such a fake answer. If you put something like that on the APA exam, you wouldn't get any points. But basically, not using a bunch of inorganic fertilizers, and then keep these farms economically viable. One of the things they're doing here is they basically like terraced the land and these hills to make it more sustainable and less likely for erosion and runoff and things like that.